Our presentation is about the Palestinian prisoners in Israel. My name is Sarah, and I will give the presentation with two colleagues from Palestine. Zeina and Anas will share his personal experience connected to our presentation. So this is our outline. We will start with some definitions, and then I will give you a very brief introduction about the human rights in Palestine. Zeina will continue with introducing some figures about the numbers of inmates in 2015. And then she will talk about the tortures in Israeli prisons. And then the highlight of our presentation will be Anas, who will share his personal story, as I already mentioned. So the United Nations Declaration defines the human rights as people, as individuals who play an important role in furthering the cause of human rights through various activities. And these include the documentations of the violations and providing assistance to the victims who seek remedies, also combating the cultures of impunity, and they try to mainstream the human rights culture and information on international level and also on domestic level. The human rights defenders in the occupied Palestinian territory face various types of harassment and human rights violations, even though they are afforded protection by several international conventions, including these in this slide. So the Palestinians who organize and participate in the demonstrations against the separation wall and the settlements are widely recognized by several international organizations to be human rights defenders because they engage in efforts to engage the civil society in peaceful methods of resistance. And here we want to emphasize the word peaceful, so we are talking about the peaceful means only to end the human rights violations and violations of international law by Israel against the Palestinian population. So in this map you can see the separation wall. It is the red line, and it was erected by the Israeli government in the beginning of the second Intifada. It started to be built in September 2000, and it should follow the line, or the green line that you see. It is the line of the agreement where the borders of the West Bank should be. However, several times it penetrates into the West Bank, sometimes even 18 kilometers, and because of this, 85% of the wall runs inside the West Bank, and 50% of the West Bank is confiscated by this wall. And this was erected in order to prevent the uncontrolled entry of the Palestinians from West Bank into Israel. Several international organizations said that they do not agree with the building of the wall. The Red Cross said that it is violating the Geneva Convention. And in October 2003, the United Nations issued a resolution which said that the wall is illegal when in the places where it deviates from the green line, and it should be torn down. However, this resolution was vetoed by the United States in the Security Council of the United Nations. So there are weekly demonstrations against this wall, and again we are talking about non-violent actions of the communities, and this is the reaction of the Israeli forces is arresting these people, detention, intimidation, and also sometimes they use collective punishment against these communities. They don't have special targets in terms of groups of people. They also use these means against children, women, the human rights defenders, and even the council members of the Palestinian Legislative Council. And this has a serious effect on the Palestinian community's fabric. The numbers will be introduced later by Zeina, but in 2015 there were more than 6,300 arrests, which means 17 arrests per day. And the Israeli occupation forces also continue to utilize the means of torture to extract confessions from the prisoners, which is absolutely prohibited by the United Nations CAT, which is the Convention Against Torture, and that was also signed and ratified by Israel as well in 1991. The convention gives the definition of the torture in a very sophisticated way, but the most important part is here that it is an act which causes severe pain or suffering, whether it is physical or mental, and the aim of this act is to get information or confession of a person on himself or a third party. Torture is used during the arrestment processes and also in the detainees and interrogation centers. And this is just one example that the trend about the human rights is going towards a wrong way. In 2015, a bill was approved in its second and third reading by the Court of Israel. It is the forced feeding of hunger striking prisoners, so these prisoners have the right to start hunger strikes, but there is a bill last year approved by the court which states that if the life of a prisoner is in danger because he is choosing to hunger strike, the court can decide to force feed him in the presence of a doctor. So the doctor should do every effort to obtain the permission of the prisoner, but if the permission is not given, then the force feeding will be proceeded even then. And now Zena will continue with some figures.
Hello, I will start these figures from the Palestinian map. This map included more than 20 prisons and detention centers. It's distributed in west and east and north in all of the Palestinian land. There's included Gaza Strip and West Bank. The first thing of all of these figures, it's from Beit Salem. It's Israel human rights organization. I use this figure just because it's Israel organization. The first one, all of these from January 2015 until December 2015. And you can see from September 2015, the red line, it means 250 increase in number of minors and also children, and women. And all of the figure, you can see and touch the increase in the number in September and October, and the beginning of November also, because it was the third intifada, it's called Jerusalem Intifada. The Palestinians held on security ground in 2015, they increased around 500 persons from January to December, and now they are around 6,000 until December 2015. Anyway, breakdown by legal state 2015, the most important three lines here, the blue one, red and green. The blue one about centrist prisoners, there are around 56% and remained in custody around 28, and the administration situation around 9. More details about minors in custody in 2015. In January there was 163, but in December 400. They increased almost 300 persons during 1 year, and you can see also how much it increased in September and October in the third intifada. The minors in custody by age group, there are 3 age groups. The blue one under 14, and the red one from 16 to 14, and the green one from 18 to 16. That means there's a prisoners under 14. It's really just children in the prison. In January there was 100.2%, and they decreased to December around 1. The children from 16 to 14 in the red line, they are around 27%, and they increase in October to 25. And the green one around 71, they was in January 90. It decreased to 71 in December, but in September and October they increased to 84. About women, there's a woman in the prisons, but it's a small number according to the men. In January there was 20, and they doubled to 44 in the 1 year, and they increased in October and September. Around 5 women increase in October, and around in August and September the same, but it increased in October another 5 or 4 women, and they live in in bad condition. Just to read report for today. It's not included this presentation, but I want to mention it for it. One of the Palestinian journalism make a report about the woman in custody period and custody time in the investigation room, and they explain how much the healthcare it's unconditional and unhealthy situation, especially in the period time for the woman and the children and the teenager. The woman in custody by age group, there is a teenager around 14 to 16 years in the green line, around 10%, and there's from 16 to 18 in the green line, 14 to 16, and in the red line, 16 to 18, and the adult in blue line, and there's 81% adult in December, and there's in October and September, they increase until 95. The administrative prisoners in 2015, they increase from 45 in January to December, 50, around 584. And here I want to show you in the October, there's 19 released and there's 131 prisoners in the jail. And in 2015, there's more than 700 and maybe 80, and it's increased in 2010 and 2012, and it starts to increase in the third intifada in 2015. And this picture I want to mention just for the total number of political prisoners is around 7,000 persons, and it's from this year, from October 2016. And we have around 64 women, 400 children. And there's 450 prisoners serving a sentence above 20 years, and there's 30 prisoners serving more than 20 years. And this is the difficult part for me. I hope I can explain it in clear thing. About torture, I want to give some statistical, and after that I will explain some methods or details about that. Almost there's 51 cases of torture were reported in the second half of last year, according to an attorney representative. Those a cause of security offense. The data was obtained by the Israel newspaper Haaretz from military court and the Israel Public Committee Against Tortures. And there's 23 Palestinians sent a number of complaints of tortures they had suffered in 2014 by Shin Bet and Shin Bet, which is Israel Internal Security Service. Each of the plaintiffs said they experienced several methods of torture. There's hundreds of torture methods used against Palestinian prisoners during interrogation conducted in Israel. Prisoners have been observed by human rights organization and Prisoners' Rights Association. A report by the United Nations lists around 200 methods of torture. The Israel Right Group from B'Tselem, the same organization I took the figure from it, listed around 105 torture methods regardless of the numbers. All of these reports indicate a grave level of violence perpetrated against Palestinians following their arrest. There's two kind or two methodology or two category for these tortures according to Ahrar Center or for Prisoners. This is one of the organization or human rights organization. There is a physical and psychological tortures, and some believe that psychological torture is less harmful than physical torture, but the mental scars left by both can leave prisoners trauma test long after this release. The torture in Israeli prisoners is systematic and started from the moment a prisoner is arrested, not from the moment they being interrogation, and they implement that in the woman, in the children, in the adult, and everyone. There is nothing executed from these tortures. There is 73 methods of the integration considered to be most popular in the Israel jails. These methods demonstrate the barbarism of the occupation and its lack of respect of basic standards of human rights. And these methods range between severe beating, putting prisoners under the cold water followed by hot water, cuffing or restarting them with their arms behind them and they tying them to a door or window for a long period of time, often lasting hours. Prisoners are also made to sit on chair and beaten with sticks until they lose consequences, made to sit on chairs and beaten with a stick. These beating may target its sensitive area of their bodies, which has the potential to leave long-term negative effect, sometimes leading to chronic disease. The Israel intelligence bases their torture of detainees of the so-called secret guideline that were approved in 1987 after the outbreak of the first Intifada. These guidelines allow them to apply moderate physical and psychological pressure on prisoners. This gave a legal cover to the torture practiced by Israel intelligence agents, and in the last 10 years, interrogators have decreased their use of torture, moving away from physical torture to psychological torture or psychological methods that can be leaving enduring scars. Will continue to use direct physical torture of varying degrees. And now I will give the word to Anas. He explain more through his personal story.
I am Palestinian. I'm a PhD student here of International Relations, Corvinus. Some of you may know me. I came here to share my story, my personal story about being imprisoned by the Israeli military forces for 2 years and 8 months. I will tell you a little bit what I went through and some of the harsh memories. I put it on paper so not to be too long, to be concise and short about the story. So I come from a north rural village from north part of the West Bank called Deir Loghsoon. And in 2003, the so-called Second Intifada, or the Palestinian unrest, in the whole West Bank was controlled by the Israeli military forces at that time. I was 15 and a half years old. There was a curfew in my village. I was prevented to go to school a few months. And there were Israeli soldiers capturing a few houses in the neighborhood, and there were tanks and armored vehicles standing in the front of our home. And in one night, in 4 a.m., the Israeli soldiers came and grabbed me from my home. I was blinded with a cloth and handcuffed around my back. I was taken to a border area. I was put on the ground for 2 days. There were other Palestinians who were arrested at the same day. I remember one of the persons were actually wounded in his back with the live bullets, and he was staying there with us without any medical treatment these 2 days. After that, I was taken to an investigation place. I stayed there for 3 months, 90 days. No lawyers were allowed to visit me in the custody at that time. Only some members of the International Red Cross organization were able to come and check our living conditions. We had little food. We were not allowed to drink any hot or sweet or eat as well. I was sleeping in a 6-meter square cell with other 12 prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, political prisoners. I remember, and I was going to the court on trial in the same time. I remember once in the court, my fellow prisoners were demanding to pray there, and the Israeli soldiers prevented them to do so. And so we had a clash with the soldiers, and at the end they accepted to do so in the court. But then after that, when we went back to the prison, we were beaten very hardly. We were being taken to the court with a van that includes a small cell, closed, and the sunlight was not going inside this small cell inside the van. And during my investigation, I was not tortured there as the presentation that Zena presented, because there was already a confession on me from one Palestinian prisoner, and according to the Israeli so-called Tamir law, if one confession occurs, then the court can put you on trial, even if you don't confess on the allegations. Compared to a normal prison. I was a minor at that time, but I was put with the adult detainees in the same time. I remember first when I arrived to the normal prison, my fellow prisoners made for me a fried hot eggs, salty with jam. So this was for me very surprising that after 3 months I was able to taste something sweet and salty. Through the 2 years and 8 months, I moved through 3 different prisons. One called Ofer. I don't know if you saw on the if you focused on the map you showed. So it was one in the north, one in the middle of the country, and one in the desert called Nakam in the south of Israel. We in the prison we had a political representation of us, because we were considering ourselves as war prisoners, while the Israelis were considering us as terrorists. Through the Palestinian prisoners movement of hunger strikes and clashes with the Israeli military forces inside the prison along the past 30 years, they gained a lot of different rights. One of them is the political right, so they can declare their political affiliation even if they are inside the prison. And we also, in my time of period, we had, for example, TV channels, good beds. We had a good food coming from the Palestinian Authority to the prison. And I also was able to finish my high school inside the prison. This was some of the rights that the Palestinians gained them through 20, 30 years along through the hunger strikes and clashes. So these were like privileges for us. Even though there is still pressures by the Israeli soldiers inside the prison. For example, I remember once they decided to put the glass between us and our families when they were visiting us. And they decided to do so to prevent us to be intimate with our families or get in touch with them. So we had to go through a 19 days hunger strike to prevent such policy of happening. I finished my 2 years and 8 months. I was released after that. I still have some problems, because after that, most of the Palestinian prisoners face 5 years of being prevented to travel anywhere outside the Palestinian territories, part of the trial on them. Me as any Palestinian prisoner, we always face harassment by the Israeli soldiers whenever we pass any kind of a checkpoint, because we are considered on the blacklist always through our lives. This is the small brief of my shared story. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I can. Yeah.
So what did they charge you with? Like what did they say was your crime?
Well, the allegations were at that time, from the 2000-2005, was the Palestinian military unrest, let's say, against the Israelis. Most of the charges were included that we were a threat to the Israeli security in any other mean, even if we plan to go out, have a say, demonstrate, or do anything. So this was considered as a threat to their security.
But you said that somebody else confessed for your crime.
Yeah.
Somebody, like for example, said that you were doing it.
Yeah, this is the rule. If someone confesses from the Palestinian side on somebody else during the investigation, even out of fear or torture or anything, this can prove that you did something wrong. You know, so even if you say I am innocent, I have nothing to do with this, nothing matters because this is the law in Israel. Yes.
I'm just curious. There are no lawyers in Palestine or something because you are sentenced with a lawyer like in court to defend you or something, and they need evidence to sentence you, or you just taken to prison without
Well,
any.
how the process goes is that the Israeli intelligence, they demand for the imprisonment and for the years of how many years you stay in prison. And then, after the investigation, I was allowed to have a lawyer, but the lawyer was in direct contact with the Israeli intelligence. And they make some sort of a contract, how many years I can be put in prison, so we don't go through a normal legal trial as any other country. So this is what happens. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you answered my question because I was wondering how do you just go to prison, no lawyer, no society, nothing.
Well, because this is a part of the conflict, and we are political prisoners. That's why.
Are most of the people who are imprisoned, are they imprisoned for political reasons, or are there are they said to commit other crimes as well?
Well, in the part that I am talking about, these are only prisons for political prisoners who go. I mean, nothing to do with other part of the of different crimes that has a different process and different jails for that and etc. Okay. So. Yes.
So you mentioned about how it's quite difficult for you to move around within Palestine without being stopped when your borders, for example, they check your internal passport. Obviously, you're here in Hungary. How difficult was it for you to get a student visa in order to study here? So that's added.
Well, the first, as I said, I was prevented to go out from Palestine for 5 years. Then when the 5 years ended, in our relations to the world, Israel is nothing to do with that. So this is something related to the state of Hungary to take a visa and travel. But then there are other problems. If I cross the border, then I have to cross through the Israeli security guards. And well, it depends on their mood if they prevent me or they stop me or question me or etc. You know. So, but direct visa, this is this is nothing to do with the Israelis. Yes.
It might be a dumb question. Are there airports in the West Bank?
No, there are no airports in West Bank. We have to pass through ground crossing to Jordan. And so we passed the Palestinian, Israeli, and Jordanian security crossings to go to Jordan, and from there we can take a flight.
But this case for the Palestinians who live in West Bank, for the Palestinians who live in Gaza Strip,
Yeah.
they go out
More
from Egypt. And it's
Egypt.
more difficult.
But you cannot fly from Tel Aviv.
No.
Palestinians
No.
cannot fly from Tel Aviv.
No, there are some categories, like the Palestinians who have a called permanent residence in East Jerusalem. They are allowed to travel through Tel Aviv, or the Palestinians who have Israeli passports inside Israel. In the West Bank on Gaza Strip, they are not allowed. And me, because of the security reasons, I'm not allowed at all to enter the Israeli territories.
Just one more. So, like you said, you don't have an Israeli passport. So, is there a Palestinian passport that you have, or
Yes, yeah, we have a
so there's a passport for Palestine?
Yeah, there is.
But I'm sorry if it's a dumb question.
Okay, so do you arrest Israelis in Venice? Do you arrest them if they arrest you?
Well, this is a funny question, but the Palestinian Authority does not have an army at all. We only have a police, which operates inside the West Bank territories in Gaza. There is uneven balance of, there is no balance of power actually between the Israelis and Palestinians. That's why it is impossible to be the other way around. And the Palestinians, they face the people, the civilians, they are in the unrest, in the conflict against the Israeli army. So this is how the conflict goes.
So you do fight.
But as civilians, we don't have any military forces.
I'm from Hebron. I was working in Ramallah, and the real distance and the real way from Hebron and Ramallah is just around 30 minutes or 35 minutes through Jerusalem. But because the separation wall and there's different checkpoint between Hebron and Ramallah, the way maybe will take 3 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. Nobody can know that, because I remember one day the checkpoint closed. There's one big checkpoint called Container. They separated the middle from Ramallah, separated Ramallah and Bethlehem and Hebron. It's between Bethlehem, Hebron and Ramallah, and they closed it for 6 hours. And there's another checkpoint between the middle of West Bank, Ramallah, and the north from Tulkarem, Nablus, Jenin. So if it's the same, and to move out of Palestine, just as example, last September when I came here with Anas, we spent 2 days just in the way, because we should cross Palestinian border, Israeli border, and Jordanian border. And the problem would be Israeli and Jordanian, and the difficult one in Israeli border, because it depends on the mood of the soldier. I never enter the jails, or I'm not a prisoner. I don't have any action in the second intifada. I was children. I just because I'm Palestinian, for example, I'm from Hebron, and I remember one day there's a problem, or in last August in Hebron. Just because my identity, I'm a Hebron person, they stopped me a few hours. I'm not directly in this action, just because my identity. And when I came here, I went to Vienna, and I carry all of my paper as I move from Palestine to out. I have Palestinian passport, I have Jordanian passport, and it is third class because I have the same right to movement like Jordanian people, but I don't have any political right inside Jordanian. And I have something green paper, it's like notebook, and without notebook I cannot enter the Jordan. And we don't have any way to travel abroad Palestine just through Jordan. So every Palestinian have like file if anyone decide to travel. And we should keep all of this passport. For example, maybe anyone from the EU, if he or she lost a passport or any formal paper, the easy way you can go and apply and say, I put it in the washer machine. But it's not the same case with Palestinian people. Maybe the Palestinian will punish Palestinian, or the Israel punish Palestinian, or Jordanian punish Palestinian. So when I went to Vienna, I'm just shocked because 3 hours or 2 hours and 40 minutes, and we arrived. No one asked me or Anas or another from my Palestinian friend about any paper. But when I move from inside Palestine, I cannot move without my ID or my passport. I cannot move out of Palestine without anything. And the real way between West Bank and Jordan, it's around 2 or 3 hours. And there's a longer procedure. We changed 3 buses. The first one, we took it from Palestinian border to Jordanian Israeli border. And the middle of this distance, and it's around 20 minutes or less than 20 minutes, we changed the bus, and Israel check all of the Palestinian person. They check the ID and the passport or the permit of travel, and they check our bags, the personal bags, and they check the chair in the bus, and under this chair and the wheel of the bus with long mirror. And after that, we changed this bus to Israeli border, and again they checked all of the bags, papers, and maybe you stuck a few hours. And after that, we changed the bus from Israeli Jordan, from Israeli border to Jordanian border, and in middle of this way, we changed it from Israeli bus to Jordanian bus, and we took our bag. And for 2 hours, we pay around, each one need $100 from Palestine to Jordan. We pay the fees in Palestinian border, but Israel who's collect this tax. And we bought 3 or 4 bus tickets. And the good thing, we have high sharing in Jordanian economy. We buy the plane ticket. I remember my ticket from Palestine to Budapest around $700. Me and Anas, $104. Because it's double tax. Yeah, actually, just we don't have airport. You can move from Budapest to from here to Tel Aviv. I checked it before 2 days. It's €100 and 50. But for me, I need €300 and 50 in January. It's not a hot season. From here to Jordan, from here to Vienna, or from here to Britain. It's transit also, not direct. But from here to Israel, on the Wizz Air airline, just €150. And even the Palestinian who allows to travel in the Ben Gurion, the Tel Aviv airline, if you want to travel from Budapest to Germany, you should go to the airport before 1 hour to the plane flight time, just to the formal procedure. But if you are Palestinian and you want to travel through Ben Gurion or Tel Aviv airport, you should be there before 6 hours. Because you are Palestinian, the checking procedure it's different and it's difficult. And that is it. It's a question about that.
So who is responsible for that situation? Like, why? No. I'm not talking about the problems about the ticket or something like that. From history.
About the 3 borders?
Yeah.
Okay.
No. Why did Israel got your region power? Who is
The first,
who,
before
who,
9, okay.
who is the responsible from this situation? Why to mix there's a one Israel country in the Palestinian
Maybe this
region?
is just my opinion. Maybe this is the cost to have some or a little bit control in small area in Palestine. Because before 1994, there was the first Intifada and the first peace agreement with Israel in 1994, Oslo Accords. And under this Oslo Accord, they divided Palestine to 3 areas, A, B, C. And the Palestinian Authority can control Area A, and Area B and Area C under Israel control. This is different about the cities like Akkad, Haifa, and this city, it's totally occupied. But I'm talking about West Bank and Gaza Strip. And the main power in Israel, there's no balance between Palestinian and Israel, and they can put the condition. And there's I cannot memorize all of the details. I'm not memorizing actually all the details in the Oslo Accords, because there's Paris Protocol, and this protocol just talking about the economic situation. And in the economic situation, one of the conditions, Israel should calculate all the Palestinian tax and VAT in all of the borders. That means the export and import products. And each month, Israel should return this money for the Palestinian government. And just in the easy way, they can punish him. And they did. They punished the Palestinian in 2006, and they forbidden all of the tax, I think 6 or 8 months. So it's a lot of details.